Melbourne is currently ranked as the third most livable city in the world. But we used to be number 1.
In addition to quality education, good healthcare, lively arts and culture, good infrastructure, and a multicultural community, an important element is nature. Melbourne has a fair share of parks, gardens, and leafy thoroughfares. In 2011, the open space was calculated as 55.4 square meters per resident, which is equal to 5 car parking spaces. However, due to population growth without an increase in open spaces, it is predicted to become almost half by 2026. The site is located at the intersection of Elizabeth Street, Burke Street, Queen Street, and Little Burke Street. It contains the Hardware Lane, which is a popular retail and dining destination within the CBD today. It is also adjacent to Elizabeth Street, which is one of the topographically lowest points in the CBD and was previously known as Williams Creek. As a result, the Elizabeth Street area has historically been prone to flooding. In the current streets, the lack of permeable surfaces makes it prone to stormwater runoff, which carries pollutants into the main waterways when left untreated and also contributes to high urban heat island effect. Additionally, although the majority of the users within the CBD are pedestrians and public transport users, the area allocated to them is disproportionate to the area dedicated to cars. For Elizabeth Street specifically, majority of the users are pedestrians and tram users. It is also projected there will be significant efforts to improve public transport and reduce reliance on private cars by 2030. Presenting Resilient Creek. Through ecological enrichment, water-sensitive urban design, and transport transformation, this project envisions a balanced coexistence between urban infrastructure and nature to create a resilient cityscape and address the issue of flooding and lack of open spaces within the CBD. The project explores this through the lens of an existing block within the CBD. The current site is categorized by impermeable surfaces, many on-street parking spaces, few bus corridors, vehicle-dominated spaces, and a large parking building. The proposed design envisions a central green open space replacing the parking building, Elizabeth Street as a creek that behaves like an ecological corridor, Burke Street as a pedestrianized access way, Queen Street as a dedicated bus lane, Little Burke Street as a pedestrian priority zone, and Hardware Lane opening to the central open space. Since there will be a reduction in private vehicles in the CBD, the existing parking building will be replaced. The existing owner will be provided a portion of the plot for a private development. The remaining area will be developed as a public open space. The open space connects directly to the pedestrianized Burke Street corridor, creating an arrival plaza at ground level. By providing access to nature, it serves as a place for relaxation within the dense city-urban environment. By introducing permeable surfaces, this central park also serves as a catchment for rainwater runoff. It takes advantage of the topography to direct water into catchment areas. And what about our streets? The project reimagines the section of Elizabeth Street within the free tram zone that extends from Flinders to Queen Victoria Market as a pedestrianized green corridor that serves as a catchment for rainwater runoff from other areas of the CBD. The current Elizabeth Street section has a handful of trees, large proportion of asphalt surfaces and impermeable areas, and streets that are mainly vehicle-dominated. The proposed design envisions reimagining the street through the lens of a creek. Rooftop gardens, bioswales, green tram lines, softscaping, tree pits, and permeable flooring are introduced to manage stormwater runoff and increase surface absorption. The current Burke Street is mostly hardscaped. Most of the area is dedicated to cars, and the canopy cover is relatively low. The proposed design is a pedestrianized corridor with increased softscaping for maximizing water absorption and reducing heat island effect. The current Queen Street is dominated by impermeable surfaces and car parking spaces. This project proposes a dedicated bus lane along Queen Street to improve public transport connectivity. The existing vehicular Little Burke Street is proposed to be a pedestrian priority zone with increased softscaping to increase rainwater absorption. Let's bring nature back into our cities.
Melbourne streets reflect the city's dynamic spirit. As this character evolves alongside its mobility landscape, the streets must adapt to meet the growing influx of visitors expected by 2030. The influx of cars entering the CBD is increasing daily, with approximately 43% of them not making any stops. Major vehicular routes such as Collins, King, and Latrobe Streets contribute significantly to this traffic. As the number of vehicles and visitors expected in the CBD by 2030 continues to rise, the city requires modern solutions to address this issue. What is the future of urban mobility? Can the CBD bid goodbye to cars? The historic Hoddle presents a unique urban layout, with our site located on the west of the Hoddle near the Southern Cross station. The four primary transit nodes, Southern Cross, Melbourne Central, Parliament, and Flinders Street stations, account for a significant portion of the foot traffic within the CBD. The loop of the train network connecting these four nodes serves as the primary entry point to the bustling urban activity found in the CBD. To meet growing needs, we propose expanding pedestrian-only zones from Swanston Street and Bourke Street Mall to Bourke Street, forming a 3 kilometers link across the CBD. This will enhance pedestrian access, easing traffic congestion in the city center. Melbourne's tram network means 12 superblocks could easily be built across the Hoddle grid. Here, we propose the superblocks strategy, a combination of 8 blocks along the central spine of Bourke Street. They are further categorized into 3 zones based on the phase of execution. Bourke Street is pedestrianized with a wider walkway and cycle track. The little streets have controlled vehicular movement, emphasizing pedestrian and bicycle tracks. The city streets are the major vehicular access. In 2056, Melbourne will be home to 9 million people, with 98% of its public open space situated within its streets. The city is projected to experience an average of 16 days annually, with temperatures exceeding 35 degrees Celsius. Facing future challenges, what if we prioritized pedestrians first, instead of focusing on vehicles? This approach would reduce urban heat and carbon emissions, showing our commitment to environmental impact and street safety with walkable streets and superblocks.
Our site boasts a prime location adjacent to Southern Cross Station, nestled amidst the CBD's dense thoroughfares. Spencer and Bourke Streets see heavy traffic and tram activity, primarily because of the presence of the Southern Cross Station entrance nearby. Let's zoom in on our site to observe the heavy traffic. Southern Cross Station and the nearby tram stop significantly contribute to the congestion of both pedestrians and vehicles at this intersection, especially during peak hours. Foot traffic also surges during special events, as this area serves as a major entry and exit point for the CBD. Notably, the only available open space within the block is located in front of the picturesque church on Bourke Street. The site is also within a heritage precinct and hosts 3 prominent landmarks: the Donkey Wheelhouse, St. Augustine Church, and the Royal Melbourne Hotel. Based on our calculations, the block has a dense composition with an FAR of 8.35 and significant ground coverage of 0.94. It features a single through-block laneway and an open space.
What we are looking for the future is the pedestrianization of Burke Street, a cooling gate, offering a glimpse into the future of urban mobility. In the initial phase of our design, we advocate for Burke Street's pedestrianization, aiming to expand the pedestrian-friendly space by removing car lanes along the street. This transformation will repurpose the street into a shared zone for pedestrians and cyclists. We propose the unique street pattern activates Burke Street with its distinctive character and creates a vibrant street culture.
It used to be a hassle to navigate through crowds to reach the tram stop, and those green-covered transport stops stand out against the cityscape. Now it's a bustling hub for shopping and socializing.
The previously congested street corner has now become a vibrant hub, with inviting cafes and restaurants that encourage interaction. Modular street furniture offers playful urban spaces, while lush greenery provides relaxing spots for visitors and commuters to connect.
With all these new cafes near my workplace, I can grab a quick meal anytime and take a breather at the many shaded seats and street features.
Compared to the old tram stop, the no-car scenario on Burke Street allowed us to remove the fence and add a canopy that blends naturally into the public space, promoting greater social connection. The new layout features an easy-to-read map that efficiently guides route directions.
Navigating the city is easier with accessible trams and info maps. The green canopy offers a refreshing escape.
After proposing the Burke Street pedestrianization, we also consider in the release the intersection of Burke and Spencer Street. Greening the tram track enhances urban ecology, while Premier Tower's setback aims to prioritize pedestrians. In the future, Burke Street will become pedestrian-friendly with green tram tracks and car bands, while Premier Tower's active front adds vibrancy, making street life engaging and dynamic. Here's the lively corner. Premier Tower's 5M and 3M setback and renewed street facade promote transparency and interaction, revitalizing the area.
Now, the intersection is livelier, like an open gateway to the city with walkable streets and engaging shop fronts and cafes.
Moving to the proposed Breath Oasis, we plan to expand the open space by demolishing the unused building and the western edge of the Maris Center. This large, multifunctional open area will provide ample space for various activities, while linear urban swales will enhance cooling and guide pedestrian flow. Zooming in on the proposed urban swale, these linear features will guide the pedestrian flow. The surrounding terraced buildings will channel rainwater into the sunken swale area, where it can efficiently capture the water.
I love strolling down the shaded street with charming shops, cozy cafes, and cooling trees alongside the swale running through the middle.
Entering Breath Oasis, the large open space for recreation and socializing is a breath of fresh air in the city's hustle. Even without events, people still use the open lawn to recharge between travels and work.
Wow, look at that! The place feels different now, like a fun playground away from the busy city.
Those pop-up shops are awesome. They make the open space so charming. I can explore so many fun things here.
To enhance access to the Breath Oasis and ease congestion at the Burke and Spencer Street intersection, we suggest adding 2 secondary streets from Spencer Street and 1 private street from King Street. Here are the scenarios showing how people use the secondary streets to navigate through the site. Melbourne, I arrived. What an amazing, welcoming place. Oh, is this a pedestrian-only street? No cars allowed here? That is great. The street here is much more comfortable, so I don't need to stay inside the building even on hot days.
Great. Release from work, and the movable seats here are so convenient. Nice to talk to you.
Hey, there's a directory map. Let's check it out and see how we can explore this city.
Wow, the large canopy at the tram stop is incredibly helpful for keeping cool.
Hey, catch me! Haha, I'm coming, wait for me!
It's like a real oasis. Next Sunday, I'll come here again to breathe.
You're right. Every season has different events happening here, so we never get bored.
Look, this exhibition features my favorite movie. I told you it's the best. I'm feeling hungry. Can we have lunch first?
We call it A-Crux, the bright future of Melbourne, starting from Southern Cross.
Mum, are you using the car today? Oh, Dad already has it. Well, I need to get to work. Dad didn't tell me he was using it. When will he be back? In half an hour. I need to be at work in half an hour. Can you drive me with the other car? No, I can't drive myself with that one. I'm not insured on it because I'm still on my P's, remember? Plus it's way too big and I've never parked with that thing. The next bus isn't for ages. I'm going to be late for work. Let me call Dad. For me, this conversation was a frustratingly common part of my young adult life when negotiating the transport options in Wamuran, my rural hometown in southeast Queensland. To many of us, car use has offered freedom and personal autonomy, yet at the same time cars have forced us to juggle our lives around them, their availability, our ability to drive them, and the infrastructure that upholds them. This is just one idea that is central to automobility, a concept that explains how our societal structures and cultural norms prioritise car-based transport. The expectation that everyone simply drives is even more prominent in rural and regional Australia. The Caboolture to Wamuran Rail Trail is challenging this. After its opening in 2020, this nearly 11-kilometre long sealed shared path became much more than what council representatives and transport planners intended for it to be. My research took me on a journey back to my hometown of Wamuran to ask, in what ways did automobility inform the vision, planning and design of the rail trail and shape the assumptions of how it might be used? How has the rail trail been used since its opening and what meanings are associated with these uses? And what does this all tell us about the potential for rail trails to shift transport planning approaches in rural and regional areas? Through qualitative interviews and observations, I found that the rail trail was planned and designed first and foremostly for recreation and tourism. However, its uses have exceeded these expectations. Locals are using and ascribing their own meanings to it, some of which include staying fit and healthy, remaining independent, giving back to the community by teaching others to ride, advocating for car-free transport options, appreciating nature while commuting to work, connecting with grandkids, making new friends, or strengthening existing ones. My findings highlight that assumptions around car use in regional areas may not always hold true, and that engaging with communities must be the cornerstone of any transport planning process if we want to move away from and reframe car dependency in regional areas. And this might even start with a rail trail. Thank you.
What is the first thing that comes to mind when you see this image? Or when I mention CrossFit? Well, for me, I felt intimidation, fear, disconnect, and something that closely resembles a cult. Well, CrossFit is a group-oriented fitness activity incorporating both weightlifting and gymnastics into one session. Sounds like fun, right? Well, you might now be thinking, what does this have to do with urban planning? Well, CrossFit, from my research, is less about what this guy is doing and more about what I'm doing right now. Talking, conversation, connection, and ultimately, community. A sense of community is a feeling of belonging and support, created through a close relationship with one another. A community builder is therefore a location or an activity where a sense of community is created. Previous research has shown that developing a sense of community can influence the perception of one's urban environment, increasing feelings of safety and connection to place. However, many CrossFit sites are located within industrial estates, not commonly associated with creating community. Therefore, my research will focus on how does CrossFit act as a community builder, aiming to investigate CrossFit through two domains. 1, CrossFit as an activity, and 2, CrossFit as a location. Through 12 interviews across 8 different CrossFit sites involving a mixture of CrossFit gym members, trainers, and owners, I found that CrossFit's activity domain was highly influential in creating a sense of community, attracting an affluent but demographically diverse participant from all fitness levels. This community was bounded together through an identity based on proximity, support, and a strong CrossFit owner leadership. Some locations described how this connection was an opportunity for business networking, acting to support a sense of entrepreneurship. Investigating CrossFit as a location was also found to not influence one's sense of community, as it wasn't necessarily tied to the elements of its physical site. However, there was a drive within some inner city locations to be better places and actively incorporate an industrial heritage, adaptive reuse, and cafes within their facility. This showcases how CrossFit has a potential role within urban renewal, but also gentrification, especially considering its high membership prices, financially limiting participation. This research recommends that community builder locations like CrossFit be better planned for and protected, especially considering that adaptive reuse and broad social appeal. Now, have I convinced you to join the CrossFit cult? Sorry, I mean community? Thanks.
Laneways. What comes to mind when we think of laneways? Some of us think of pockets between buildings filled with cafes and restaurants. Some of us think of smelly dumpsters and car garages. I often think of them as mysterious streets designed by urban planners who really likes puzzles. You may have come across research and news articles about laneways in the city. What's puzzling is residential laneways are often left out of these discussions. My thesis research is about bridging this gap. My research questions are asking who controls these residential laneways and what can be done to revive them. And in doing so, I'm exploring the relationship between urban narrative and urban placemaking. Think of it as Melbourne's way of storytelling, where the main characters are not just the people, but also the street themselves. Urban placemaking is about giving these laneways a makeover, except for the lanes that are the main characters. Urban narrative is about giving these laneways a personality redemption arc, whether they're the main characters or not. Residential laneways in Melbourne are governed by the council and the residents. The council typically cares more about laneways that are the main characters, while the residents want to revive these laneways regardless if they're the main characters or not. So I try to find out how this relationship works. I started out by mapping laneways within my study area, which is in Brunswick and Fitzroy. I also started looking at policies to see what the councils have done to manage them. Topping it all off, I did site visits to confirm and debunk data I found from the policies and the maps. What I have found out is that residential laneways within my study area make up 26% of total road network's length and land parcels that remained unused and abandoned. What I also found out is no one really controls these residential laneways. So it makes it hard to implement policies without conflicts between what the residents need and what the councils want. Instead of making policies that favor car access through these residential laneways, make ones that favor pedestrians and cyclists access through these laneways. Instead of looking at laneways from above like most councils do, look at them from the bottom up, like the residents that use them do. These would naturally bring in human traffic through these lanes, and like the esteemed architect and urban designer Jan Gell once said, if you design streets for people to cycle and walk, it will naturally bring life into the city. So the next time you find yourself in these laneways, especially the ones behind your house, don't think of them as useless spaces. Think of them as gems, ones that are hidden behind plain sight.
I acknowledge the deep connection between the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples and their ancestral country which has always known the Woiwurrung language. We can see it in place names around us. Mary, Naarm, Darebin, Birrarung. Through colonisation, many places had their names erased. But this is where place name decolonisation comes in, restoring Indigenous names or introducing new ones. This practice actually has a long history in Victoria, from post offices in the 1800s having their vulgar European names replaced with more melodic sounding Indigenous ones, or the Grampians becoming Grampian Scarry Word in the early 90s as a way to attract more tourism. In recent years, we're seeing more of these renamings, largely led by local councils, which made me ask, What drives them to engage in place name decolonisation? I interviewed councillors and officers at Marybeck Council, which changed its name from Moreland, and Hepburn Council, which changed the name of Jim Crow Creek to the Djadjurrung language Lani Baramul-Yaluk. Both previous names had racist connotations, and both had actually been brought to council's attention in the past, without follow-up. So what changed? Well, my interviewees framed place name decolonisation as part of their larger reconciliation efforts. So these councils started making statements of commitment, establishing reconciliation committees, appointing reconciliation officers, and it meant that when these issues came up again, they felt that addressing it was non-negotiable. This also helped answer my second question. How do councils engage with their communities on these issues? Place name changes can spark a lot of resistance, as it relates to people's place identity. Both councils prioritised educating the community about the significance of the name change and ensuring the safety of the local Indigenous community. Neither council allowed the community to debate whether the name should be changed or ask them to suggest names. Both had information campaigns, including reports by historians into the background of the names. However, both councils also talked about what a huge undertaking the process was, in terms of time, resources, and costs. This raises issues with the viability of place name decolonisation, and my recommendations include updating the Victorian naming rules to reduce the administrative burden for councils. To end on a positive note, my research has highlighted the strong relationships the councils already have with Indigenous communities, and has underscored the importance of councils having reconciliation measures in place if they wish to engage in place name decolonisation.
Let's start with a question. Raise your hand if you walked, took PT, or drove to uni today. Now keep your hand up if you think you risked your life by coming here today. No one? That's pretty standard, right? It's a normal commute. Well, out of all the women I interviewed, each one worried about dying each time they took to the seat of their bike. Half the women were expected to text their loved ones once they arrived safely from their cycling commute. Despite it being more likely to die walking than cycling, for women the perceived probability of death was real. No other form of transport requires this amount of risk. But for women, it is their lived reality. My thesis is female psychology. Yes, a play on words. Understanding the influence of cycling infrastructure on the lived experiences of female cyclists in Melbourne. In Melbourne, local councils have reduced the complexities of the barriers females face in cycling to one sole solution: bike lanes. My thesis has sought to understand what role infrastructure plays relative to other factors, such as meaning, materials, and skills and knowledge, in shaping the lived experience of female cyclists. I operated with the research question of, how do women's navigation of cycling infrastructure in Melbourne shape their lived experience? I conducted 11 interviews with female cyclists and applied a social practice theory framework to data. Social practice theory asserts 3 tenets, comprised of meaning, materials, and skills and knowledge. And these 3 tenets overlap like a Venn diagram to form a practice. My research uncovered 3 key findings that shed new light on existing literature. First, the role of infrastructure is inherently connected with meaning, materials, and skills and knowledge, and further, is framed as a sociocultural product. In Melbourne, cycling infrastructure was found to reinforce gendered hierarchies of power. Second is regarding commute versus recreational rates of cycling. Australia is characterised by high rates of recreational cycling and low rates of commuter cycling. However, in this study, only 1 out of 11 participants cycled for recreational purposes. This was linked to cycling infrastructure creating more stresses than it actually alleviated for participants. And third, cycling spaces for the acquisition of skills and knowledge, such as cycling shops, were found to be places viewed as hostile, demeaning, male-dominated, and intimidating spaces. This acted both as a barrier to entry for cycling, but also in the longevity of participation for female cyclists. So why is this significant? I found in my research that cycling as a practice is a microcosm for what it is like to be a woman in public life today. cycling and gender is not a one-directional relationship. Just as cycling is shaped by gender, cycling is also the site for the production of gender. Cycling infrastructure is only one factor in the lived experience of female cyclists. An increasing cycling participation and accessibility to cycling for females cannot be achieved through infrastructure alone. Meaning, materials, and skills and knowledge must all be addressed holistically in policy. Thank you.
What do you see when you look at this image? I see a lot of houses, I see a lot of cars, but I don't see many people. And I definitely don't see many people walking in the streets. Jane Jacobs once said that if you want people to walk, they need a place to walk to, like the local shops and retail areas. When I look back at this image, I don't see many places that people could walk to, and I definitely don't see many shops. My research looks at these elements and tries to understand how we should be planning our communities to improve walkability, based on how we plan for commercial areas. My research argues that the way we plan for commercial areas can influence walkability based on its structure and size. My research spatially analysed land use data from 10 case studies within Greater Melbourne. The data focused on the overall structure of the commercial areas within each case, which was coded to be either a linear structure, such as shopping strips that you might see on Sydney Road or Chapel Street, or cases of a clustered structure, which is more like shopping centres like what you see at Chadstone or Fountain Gate. My study also looked at whether the overall size of commercial area influenced walkability, such as if we had one little section of shops to cater for thousands of houses. Is that enough commercial area to achieve walkability? Using this data, I then measured walkability based on how many residents could access their local shops within a 10-minute walk from home. My results found two key findings: that when it comes to neighbourhood walkability, both commercial area structure and size matter. My results found that commercial areas with a more linear structure had greater walkability than those that were in a clustered structure. I also found that cases that had more commercial area in their boundary had greater walkability compared to those with a small amount. Interestingly, the best results were found when the cases had both a structure that was linear and also large in the amount of commercial area allocated. The worst results were when the size was high, but in a clustered structure. My findings suggest that the way we plan for new communities needs to be revised from the current status quo of a sea of residential area to interweaving commercial area back into the community and prioritising this in land use budgeting to allow enough for it to cater for the whole community, not just the lucky few. By making these changes, we can make walkability a priority. And as planners, this can start by changing the way that we plan for commercial areas. Thank you.